All right, so walking is complicated. Walking technique is complicated. I believe that walking technique is too complicated for our conscious brains to be able to improve it while we're walking. Because just think about the literally millions of muscle fibers that have to coordinate through your whole body to take even a single step. Like, it's a really, really complicated thing to do. However, that doesn't mean we can't improve our walking with careful exercises to improve our ranges of motion and understanding kind of the goals of gait improvement. And then we can take those exercises and practice them in little pieces on our walk. And then after that, allow our bodies to kind of run with it, or walk with it, I suppose I should say. So I'm going to break it down into some of the exercises you can use and the reasons for the hip mobility skills that we've talked about in this program, just so you have kind of the big picture overview. However, like I said, I wouldn't mess around with your actual walk too much, because you're not likely to be able to be as good at it as your brain and your subconscious nervous system is going to be. So we've talked about, sort of in various places, about the two ways of propelling ourselves in the world. So you can either use gravity, which would be a lean and a catch, and a lift, a lean, a catch. And this is the way that tends to crush our knees and deload our hips and not be awesome for our pelvic floor. So that's the falling side of walking. The pushing side of walking is why we're doing the pelvic lift and the hamstring work and the hip extension work in this program. So the pushing side doesn't look like very much, and it certainly doesn't look like walking, because first of all, I'm not perfect. I have a lot of range I still need to improve in my walking. And second of all, because when you are walking, there's a whole bunch of momentum and some falling that's going to go into it too. So what we're looking for is to get more push and less fall. But when I isolate the push, you're going to be underwhelmed. So go with it, be underwhelmed, that's cool. As you practice it, I think you'll understand exactly kind of how powerful this little exercise is. So for a posterior push to drive us forward, you want to think about a canoe or a stand-up paddleboard, and it's the paddle pushing behind that's moving the board or the canoe forward. This would work with a pole vaulting analogy too. You plant the pole pushes back, the vaulter moves forward. That is how things are supposed to move forward on this earth, at least unless they're falling. And so it's a preferable way to move from the point of view of your long-term sustainability. How we get there as a human is by pelvic lifting. So that's that hip abduction and stability. It is also hip adduction and stability on the inner thigh to hold yourself there. Then the hamstrings contract to pull that standing leg back behind you, or to push the earth behind you, and that pushes your pelvis forward. There should be some slight twist in your pelvis, but not too much. If you start twisting your pelvis a lot, then you're getting a lot of spine stuff in there again. So this is really a translation, and the translation is going to be limited by your hip extension ability. And that's why I can't get very far forward, is because my hip extension is quite limited. The translation is also going to be limited by the length of the back of your leg. So if you don't have dorsiflexion, you can't translate forward very far. Now, it's not going to be as relevant in this particular program, but ultimately your translation is also limited by your big toe extension. So you need to have hip extension and big toe extension and length through the back of your leg in order to achieve this posterior push-off, which is what allows you to have muscle power pushing you rather than gravity pulling you. So my favorite exercise for this, and I do practice this in the mornings very slowly on my own, and it will burn if you're doing it right. You will feel this in your hips, is this very small movement. So what I will do is I will stand, I will pelvic lift, I will stabilize. I will think about pressing my heel back. When I don't have any more press, I will lower. I shift my weight to my other side. I press into that foot. I push back and I lower. And I shift my weight, pelvic lift, press back just as far as I can press without weird twisting, and I gently lower. And you can do that for a few minutes before your hips start burning like crazy. So it's a really nice way to build the pelvic listing, to work on the hip extension, to work on the hamstring work in a functional way that is still not your regular walk. So that's my favorite walking exercise. My other favorite walking exercise is more of an awareness piece, and that's when you're walking up a slight incline. It's not a big hill, it's not flat. And as you do that, as you kind of think about pressing backwards with your standing leg as you walk, really exaggerating the press back and trying to feel your hamstrings can be a really nice way to just start to understand the role of your hamstrings in pushing you. So, I can't tell you how much you should feel your hamstrings or how much work you should feel, but you can try to feel some work and see what that's like for you and start to kind of get that feeling of posterior push-off as opposed to what you may have been used to in your life and whatever gait that would be, but probably a gait that involves a lot of falling. So from the point of view of your hips, it's the extension, it's the adduction and the abduction, and it's that push behind, so that's really hip extension, that are the key walking skills. And then the reason I've also got rotation in this program is twofold. Number one is because internal and external rotation in the hip joint, as you build your capacity for that, you build space in your hip. As you build space in your hip, you build the ability to hip extend. As you build your hip extension, then you build your walking. So internal and external rotation are a prerequisite in your hip joint for effective extension. The other reason is more complex, and hopefully you've done my Build Your Better Feet program or Take 10, because I'm not going to get into it in great detail right now. But I just want to kind of give you at least a snapshot. Many of us have compensated I don't even know why we would compensate. Many of us walk with our feet turned out to some degree. This turnout creates rotational forces that travel up to our hips and cause all kinds of sort of havoc to happen there. So that's a pelvic floor problem creator. It's a bunion creator. It's not that great. So I teach walking and movement with a straight ahead foot. So for most people, that means having the outside of edges of their feet point straight ahead and pretty parallel to one another. And that's a pretty high level overview. You could be more technical about it, but that's about what you want. So you don't want turnout, you want straight ahead feet. Once your feet are straight ahead, if you bend your knees without doing any correction, you might find that your knees start to dive inwards. And I'm a good example of that because I have a lot of this kind of permanent internal, semi-permanent internal rotation at my hips. So to address that, because this is fallen arches, this is bunions, this is pelvic floor problems, this is knee problems. To address that, external rotation at the hips is one of the prerequisites. So although this hips program isn't going to give you the whole story on that, and if you want the whole story on that, that's in Build Better Feet. But we will work on that hip rotation capacity in external rotation because that's going to support fixing your rotation or supporting your rotation, improving your rotation in the long term. So that's why it's in there. So hopefully this little snapshot of walking technique and what we're going for has made sense for you. This is why I've put together the program that I have. And of course, in each module, there's a little explanation about why the piece is there for you. So as always, questions, comments, your thoughts on this lecture are always appreciated. You can hit me up anytime, and I hope you're enjoying the course.